What was the first warning signs?
You don't want to say a mandate, but it felt like that in these other dioceses, that when this new bishop came in, there was a bit of a mandate to kind of stamp down or stomp down on that booming growth of tradition. And so we were a little concerned about that as well.
Absolutely astounded by my own technical wizardry there. Hi, welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Mark Lambert, and today I'm joined by Brian Williams, who is probably best known, Brian, as the Liturgy Guy, aren't you?
I suppose so, yeah.
For a number of years. You used to write a really well followed blog, but which is still up there, but you don't do that quite so much now, do you?
Yeah, no, I kind of backed off of the blogging. I started that in July of, well, I guess we're coming up on an anniversary here, but started that in July of 2013. And it was kind of the initial angry man with the keyboard, but not really that angry, but just, as I saw liturgical abuses and I just saw things that were happening in at masses, I just felt like I had to kind of just say something about different practices, communion in the hand or whatever. And as a lay person who was kind of going through and learning some things on my own, I just thought it was a good idea to maybe share that with other folks as well. Never claiming expertise at all. And I did that for a number of years. And yes, the blog is still technically up, and I still pay to keep advertisements off of it, even though I don't really write anything new on it, because I don't want anybody going to it all these years later and having to look at some weird little ads that aren't appropriate for a Catholic blog. So I do that as well. And I think it's still hitting maybe 10,000 hits a month just because of the articles that are on there. So that's fine. I leave those up. But most of what I do nowadays with regards to the Liturgy Guy is just actually on social media and really more of the Facebook platform, which seems to be, kind of a good way to get messages out there and communicate.
Yeah, I think you can easily find it on Facebook if you just type in Liturgy Guy. You can see you've got loads of followers and everything on there. So I always try and keep up with it. But and we met each other, didn't we, a couple of years ago now? So you actually, the big reason that I've got you on is to pick your brains about what's going on in your diocese, which is the Diocese of Charlotte.
Yeah. So we moved here. I got moved here for work back in 2005. And so we're coming up actually on 20 years that we've been in Charlotte. Actually, when we came to Charlotte, I was not Catholic yet. I was married to a Catholic and had the marriage back in California, and the kids are being raised Catholic, but I myself was not Catholic yet. And so I came into the church the very next year after we got here. And But for quite a few years when I was blogging early on, it was, I think Charlotte was beginning to get on the map. We had a good group of younger, conservative, leaning traditional priests. We had a bishop who was very supportive of that, made the liturgy a focus of his time as our bishop. Was one of, I think, his 4 primary objectives that he really wanted to accomplish, was to kind of shift the liturgy much more in a traditional sense. Now, this is a bishop who never offered the traditional mass publicly. He didn't offer the mass ad orientem. He didn't do anything like that. But he was a canon lawyer. He's fluent in Latin, and just very supportive of the direction that the church was going, particularly with Benedict as Pope, and Summorum Pontificum as the law of the church, if you will, the motu proprio. So, we kind of had this little golden era, if you want to call it that. And when I was blogging, I was doing a lot of writing about it as well. And other writers kind of grabbed a hold of it. And so I think Charlotte began to get a bit of a national and maybe even a little bit of an international attention for what was happening here. I don't know if I was ever say it was the most traditional diocese, but I think you definitely would put it up in the top 5 for its friendliness towards the traditional mass, and then just the very orthodoxy of its preaching and things of that nature. And then our bishop, due to health reasons, resigned about a year ago. When we got a new bishop, things have been a little different.
And the fruit. So he was there for a long while, though, wasn't he? The bishop before.
And he say that again.
He was there for a long while, the bishop, the old bishop, wasn't he? He was in place for a long while.
Yes, our prior bishop, Bishop Jugas, I believe became bishop, was consecrated bishop a year before we came out here. I want to say it was 2004. And so it would just, I think he hit 20 years, I believe. He hit 20 years, at which point then he retired last year a bit early for some health reasons. And he had been having some problems the year or two before that, just unable to make certain masses, unable to travel as much as he had been. So he resigned, and then we retired, and then we received Bishop Michael Martin, who was coming to us from the Archdiocese of Atlanta, which Charlotte kind of falls under. So
I understand, the way I understood it. Now, this is before I even came to Charlotte or met you or anything. Charlotte was on my radar because it had a really high proportion of vocations. Is that correct?
Yeah. We had talked about that quite a bit in the past too. We had I had profiled that as well for the website, and others had touched upon it. We were seeing a proportionally speaking very high level of vocations, and it's hard to kind of say. You see some dioceses with 100 plus, but these are dioceses with millions of Catholics. Technically, I mean, maybe they're not all going to mass on Sundays, but millions of Catholics. And a lot of times, if you look at their seminaries and their vocations posters, you might see quite a few of their seminarians are from out of the country or from Africa or South America. Obviously, still very valid vocations, just not necessarily homegrown, if you want to call it that. And our diocese was actually increasing those vocations just with the young men that were in the diocese going to the diocesan parishes. And so we don't have a Fraternity of St. Peter parish here. There's no Institute of Christ the King here. It's all diocesan parishes. At that time, I would say about 9 of the parishes maybe had the Latin Mass being offered regularly. Most not on Sunday, but a weekly or an every other week type Latin Mass. And quite a few of the pastors had taken on the traditional practice of only young men serving the altar. And what we saw, not surprisingly, much like Arlington, Virginia, and I think Wichita and a few other places that were a bit more traditional leaning here in the States, we saw quite a few men responding to the call. Our prior bishop also set up a week. Each summer, there's 1 week they call it Quo Vadis days, where young men are invited to the Benedictine college locally, and there's a whole program to kind of just let them explore that vocation opportunity. So these are young altar servers. They're going young. I mean, most of them, I think you have to be high school age, but it's kind of in that time period where some might stop going to church potentially. We see statistically, but these are young men who are still actively serving, and it just kind of invites them to explore the opportunity maybe of a vocation. And then the other big thing our bishop did a couple of years ago, our former bishop, was to to create a college seminary here within the diocese, which is you don't see a lot of those, at least not here in the States anymore. And so we had our own minor seminary or college seminary that these young men could go to for their first few years, and really kind of bridged the gap, if you will. And so we saw the vocations increase. I think at one point, I don't want to exaggerate, but I think at one point we probably had about a total of 50 young men, give or take, in our seminary at various stages, from year 1 up through theology, up to deacons who were away a year away from ordination to the priesthood, and that's for a diocese that had at that time, I think, maybe around 200,000 people in it, and about 90 parishes or 95 parishes. So I think when you're looking at 50 vocations and only 95 parishes, that's a pretty good ratio. Could it be better? Of course, but that's comparatively speaking, a very good ratio.
Well, especially when you compare it to the Archdiocese of Chicago, for example, where the 3 of us have been a couple of times over recent years, where you've got over 2 million Catholics. And I don't suppose you're aware of how many vocations they had this year, are you, Brian?
I'm not. I have looked at their poster in the years past, with the seminarians, and I don't know if they clear 100. I don't want to shortchange them, but they may have 100.
Yeah, this year ordained 2. which is, it says everything you really need to know.
Well, you know what? And to your point, actually, this year in Charlotte, in Little Charlotte, we're ordaining 6.
Right, there you go.
And last year was 7 we ordained. And I think the year before that was 6, maybe. I don't want to exaggerate. I think we've had 20 ordinations in the last 3 years, counting what's happening in the next week or so here with ordination.
All right. So the point of saying that is Bishop Dugis, obviously he was orthodox. He wasn't a raging traditionalist or anything like that, but he was solid. He believed in good liturgy. He was teaching the faith to his people. And we see this all over the world, don't we? Where you've got the Catholic faith being authentically preached, you've got vocations, you've got lots of people going to mass, you've got children hanging on to the faith. And basically where you've got this progressive, liberal, sort of 60s attitude to the faith, it's sterile. You've got nothing.
Yeah. I used to put a little tagline on the Facebook page sometimes. I'd share some type of beautiful photograph that kind of came my way from around the world, some beautiful liturgical picture. And I would write, authenticity is attractive, or authenticity is beautiful. People respond to that. I think when we just show Catholicism for what it is, and by that I mean what it's always been, people respond to it. If you're making excuses or, I don't know, deforming it into something that it never was and that it really isn't really, it's not attractive, and it's almost like somebody who's just trying to fake their way through their early dating life and hoping they can fool somebody to think they're something they're not. Just be authentic. And people respond to that authenticity. Even politically speaking, sometimes when certain candidates defy all the odds, and we've had one here in the United States the last 10 years that just nobody thought this guy would win any elections, and here he is, president again. But it's not a playbook you would normally say this is the playbook you want to run for president, and we've seen that in other countries as well. But I think in a weird way, a lot of people, it's just because they're like, hey, you know what? I know what I'm getting. And I think with the church, we have this kind of scene here locally, and we've seen it, but to your point, around the world, which is where it is presented in its fullness, people respond to it because in its fullness, it's beautiful, it's true, it's good, and it's recognizable, And one of the things we talk about, kind of, I think, on the traditional side of things, is if I were to, jump into a time machine and go back 1,000 years, what I recognize, what I am seeing. And we know that with a traditional mass, for example, a traditional Roman rite, you would recognize what you are seeing 1,000 years ago. You'd recognize it 500 years ago, 100 years ago. But I think if you take that same individual or a different individual from 1,000 years ago and brought him forward and drop him into, Father Bob's friendly, nice church where it's just all those extras that have kind of cropped up over the last 25 to 50 years, it wouldn't be recognizable, and I think that's a little bit what Benedict was striving for, which is saying that whether you're sitting in the diocesan Novus Ordo or diocesan traditional mass, they shouldn't be foreign to you. You shouldn't feel out of place in either one of those. And I think our prior bishop felt that as well. So
well said. And we can see the fruit, can't we, where that's done, which is a really important point, because we often get our bishops and our clergy talking to us about vocations. And for those of us who've been watching carefully, here are the answers, and the answers are really obvious. And I think I love the point that you made about authenticity, because as someone who's been involved in catechesis of young people for a long while, you really see that with the kids, that they don't think you believe it, and they're shocked when you say you do believe it. Well, what sort of a place have we got to where that's the situation, where the people they're surrounded by, perhaps at Catholic school, give them the impression that no one really believes it? We have to ask ourselves serious questions about, are we living out our lives, our Catholic vocation, aren't we, in our own lives? Like, all these things are what will change the culture if we allow them to.
And I think with young people, and you definitely would know this with your background, I think with young people, they're gonna pick up on it if it's fake. I had our oldest daughter we were in California at the time. I wasn't even Catholic, but was attending Catholic church with the family, much smaller family back then. We didn't have as many kids. And she was part of the Life Teen program. I don't know if that's international or not, Life Teen, but it's kind of the rock and roll mass for teenagers.
Yeah.
And looking back, it was just, I haven't been to a Life Teen mass in 20 years. And it's just something weird about people my age trying to be hip and cool for the young people and just jumping around and like, yeah, kids. And it's kind of pathetic a little bit, it's, maybe Mick Jagger can get on stage and still do that kind of stuff. And people like, I saw Paul McCartney a couple of years ago and I'm like, I actually enjoyed the show. It was a fantastic show. Not most of us can't do that at this age and still like actually appeal to younger folks. And I think that's another thing, which is that authenticity comes through. Don't try to be something you're not. It's that, I think it was a cartoon here in America, King of the Hill, where it says something like, with Catholic rock masses, you're not making, or Catholic, you're not, Christian rock is what it was. You're not making rock music better. You're not making Christianity better. You're making rock music worse.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like with the Catholic mass, it's just, and with Catholicism, not just the liturgy, but Catholicism, just present it as it is. I mean, it's true. It's going to resonate because we have that inside of ourselves. Even if we don't understand why we're responding the way we are, that authenticity is going to come through. And I think kids absolutely see that.
Totally. So well said. And catechesis comes from the Greek word for echo, doesn't it? We're not supposed to be presenting something new and different and exciting. We're just asked to represent the wonderful message that God has revealed to us. So it's not really that complicated. So
go ahead. No, go ahead.
So you've got all this. I remember when I came to your diocese, I was like, went round to see a few churches and I just thought, wow, this is brilliant. They've got it all going on here. They've got vocations, packed masses, everything's going great. So unfortunately, Bishop Jugas he's unwell and they put a new bishop in, Bishop Michael Martin, and he's been there for just a year now, I believe.
Yeah, he just hit, I think, like May 27th or June. He's out a year right now. Yeah.
So, we're both businessmen, and in business, obviously, if you took over a managerial role in a successful section or a successful company, the first thing you do is just change everything and chuck out everything that's working, don't you? Is that what happened?
I know it's I mean, obviously no. And, but you know what, it's interesting. And you gotta be careful not to ascribe motives, but let me put it this way. I think what you would think someone measures success by and what someone considers success is not necessarily always the same thing. So I think both you and I consider success by that vocations boom. We consider success by that healthy coexistence of the traditional mass and the new mass in the same parish setting without, people fighting in this great, level of disunity. We consider success by, are the faithful living their vocation? Most people are called to marriage and family. And that's another thing you find in this diocese and particularly in many of the more traditional parishes is booming families, I guess. It's mass can be loud. There's a lot of little kids there. The average age of mass attendees is getting younger. All the things that we hear kind of like it's lip service. But if you wanted that, but you didn't want the tradition part coming with it, then there's a problem. And it's not unique to our diocese. But so again, I think the way we would measure success is by what you saw when you visited us a few years ago. And I have to kind of wonder, well, actually, I don't wonder because we have some documents that have come out recently that the way I think our current bishop measures that success seems to be a little bit different.
So tell us about that then. What was the first warning signs? Like, how's it been since he's only been there a year? So were you like jubilant when you got a new bishop, or nervous, and how? I
think everybody was nervous. Yeah, everybody was nervous. I think we knew what we knew what we had with Bishop Jugas, and our priests were the priests that we kind of most looked to as really nurturing the vocations and nurturing the big young families. The thing with the vocations boom is out of these 95 or 96 parishes across the entire diocese, which is basically the Charlotte area and Western North Carolina, is that what the diocese covers. there were about probably 6 parishes out of 96 that produced at least, I think, 50% of our seminarians at any given moment. And so you could count on one hand and maybe a couple extra fingers the parishes that were really providing that to our diocese, and what they were doing, the blueprint, if you will, that they had. Not every single one was a Latin Mass parish, but their liturgies were reverent, and the pastors could offer both masses. They, much in how Pope Benedict saw it, they were familiar with the rite, historical rite, and so when we got our new bishop, I think there was and not to be uncharitable, but I think there was probably some concern, just because we knew that we had this kind of really good, unique situation. And a little bit like when some people remembered in 2013, and Pope Francis was elected out of the conclave, and everybody said, a Jesuit? It was a little bit like a Jesuit. Like, a lot of people didn't have very good experiences with Jesuits on a personal level, or just theologically what they had seen. And I think there was a lot of people who had that kind of reaction of a Jesuit who was ordained about 1970. That's not the normal combination of orthodoxy and tradition that I look for. And we had to think a little bit of that, and not to be disrespectful, but we had Franciscans responsible for one of our parishes in the Charlotte area for quite a few years, and then they had left. I don't know exactly how they left, but they left, and diocesan priests kind of took that parish back over, if you will, and it went from being a rather liberal. It's right next to the university here in Charlotte, and it went from being a kind of more of a liberal parish to, we got these diocesan priests in there, and all of a sudden it's a parish that was offering the Latin Mass within a few years, confession regularly, really kind of getting young people over from the university to attend and go to Mass, and kind of booming. And we saw this turnaround. And then we get a Franciscan who was, I think, ordained about 1980, 1979. And so there's always a little bit of concern with some of the religious orders as to the level of orthodoxy, and definitely the level of like liturgical formation. Nobody really runs to the Franciscans and say, let me learn about the liturgy of the Franciscans. The Dominicans you think about in certain ways, they have their own rite, but you think about them. Franciscans, not so much. So I think just kind of at face value, there was a little bit of concern about like what's going to happen. And lastly, we had seen other dioceses where it seemed like there was a certain growth of tradition and vocations, etc. And then you saw the bishop that replaced the existing bishop have, you don't want to say a mandate, but it felt like that in these other dioceses, that when this new bishop came in, there was a bit of a mandate to kind of stomp down on that booming growth of tradition. And so we were a little concerned about that as well.
So basically the way that he's justified the clampdown on the traditional liturgy is fairly reasonable, isn't it? I mean, it's on Pope Francis rather than Bishop Martin, because he's saying that Bishop Jugis wrote and asked for an extension, which is the norm as laid out in the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, which was granted, and that the time that was given for that was up. So what then is the problem with, that doesn't mean that everything's okay with what he's done. So why were the alarm bells initially rung with the restrictions?
Well, so I do think that people do need to remember that it was under Bishop Jugis that the diocese, I'm sure was compelled by Rome, because again, it's obvious we very much were on the radar, and some of that might be blamed on local bloggers and people who wanted to really highlight how great the diocese was. And again, not perfect, but by any means. But we do not have and did not have a traditional dedicated parish with the full traditional sacramental life. There is no fraternity parish, Fraternity St. Peter Parish, for example. We had asked for things like that in the past, so that you could just immerse yourself completely in that type of setting. We didn't have that. We were told, at the chancery, that we weren't going to have that. They liked the Summorum Pontificum model. We had met with the Vicar General a couple different times, and so we had that. So it's not like we were getting everything we wanted, or was the perfect scenario that all of us wanted. But with Traditionis Custodes, our prior bishop, Bishop Jugis, did have to, after I guess about 2 years, he had to do something. I guess Rome must have put the pressure on, And so 2023, it came out that we had been given 2 years. We had requested a dispensation and got it for 2 years for 4 diocesan parishes to continue with the Latin Mass being offered in its current time. And the letter from our bishop at that time did say that it was a 2-year extension, and we were going to have to be, I'm paraphrasing it, but had to be educated on the Novus Ordo and like be prepared to make this transition, if you will, to being. So the groundwork was laid. Now, I honestly feel that when that was done, maybe everyone felt that our bishop and our priests and everybody would maybe outlast the Francis papacy and could revisit it. It was kicking it down the road a little bit. It was kind of playing a dangerous game, and it kind of playing a dangerous. I mean, this is me kind of speculating, so I don't. No one told me this, but I think we were playing a little bit of a dangerous game, and it bit us. And so you come around again now to 2 years later. So it was Bishop Jugas who got that in writing from Rome for us. But you come around 2 years later, and I think
you can see how it makes sense, because it's just so bizarre to have Pope Francis turn over what Pope Benedict the scholar. The lack of humility about Traditionis Custodes just blows me away, that you had this incredible scholar who was the Pope, and this is probably the centerpiece of his 7-year pontificate, is this rewriting of what happened after the council that had been in progress, hadn't it, successively from the council. You had this initial sort of crackdown under Paul VI, but then you had JP2 had very much said, oh no, that's what was holy before can't be considered to be unholy, and then you had it further rowed back by Benedict XVI, and then Pope Francis comes in, and basically it's very obvious from his pontificate that again, he's a Jesuit, so I don't want to make generalizations, but Jesuits aren't best known for their interest in the liturgy, and indeed Pope Francis didn't even say Mass publicly, did he, for I think the last couple of years of his pontificate, which shows you. I mean, it seems very much to me that he wasn't all that bothered about the liturgy in any sort of sense, but he seemed to be using it as an ideological weapon, a political tool that he could use against the people who are the most ferocious critics of him. And so you ended up with this draconian thing. Surely, I mean, the most amazing thing to me is that so many clergy went along with it. So you can understand why Bishop Jugas and perhaps some of the senior clergy in the diocese might be going, hang on a minute, he can't have that long left. Let's see if we can wait him out. It's a sensible play, I think, don't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was the fact that they were able to receive a dispensation and keep it in the 4 parishes where it was being offered on a weekly Sunday basis to fulfill one's obligation was a pretty strong response compared to some other places where it was immediately kind of removed from parishes and these different chapels set up that did not even fit enough people in it. So I think it was a pretty strong play as things go. And you do have to go back, as you mentioned with Traditionis Custodes. In the world of politics, you expect we have a thing in the United States of America where the president can sign executive orders. It's basically a way around the legislature. I don't like these EOs, but that's what they do. So you get one party wins an election, and the president signs a bunch of executive orders, and then 4 years later, the next guy wins, and he undoes all those executive orders with his executive orders, and all of a sudden, it's just this game. And Traditionis Custodes, with its attempt 7 or 8 years later to repeal, or it did not attempt to repeal Summorum Pontificum and just say we're doing the opposite now, just strikes at politics. It's not what the church does. The church is just organic. You referenced it. You have the council, you had all this craziness, and then it begins with JP2. It really ramps up with Benedict. There's this recalibration going on. It's like we cannot reject our past. What was once sacred is always sacred. It can't be bad for us now. You have this whole momentum going, and you see it organically taking root in different parishes and different dioceses with young priests. Every study shows you these younger priests are so much far more conservative and orthodox than their preceding generation. So you have this story going on, and then under the pretext of disunity, based off of a survey that there are bishops who say, I never got that survey. Nobody asked me about this question about unity in my diocese. and then it never gets released. But under that pretext of this survey of disunity being discovered, they then, clamp down on the Latin Mass worldwide because it was being too successful. And I remember I guess it was still Twitter back then, I don't think it was X, but a priest posting on Twitter at the time, on one breath, the church is saying, how do we get the young people back to Mass, and how do we get the young people to care again and get excited about their faith? And on the other, we went from that to saying, how do we take Mass times for Latin Masses out of our bulletin and not let anybody know when it's going to be offered so that the young people don't show up? It was, and of course, if you've kind of seen this fight long enough, and I'm relatively new in the traditionalist world. I don't know if some would consider me that. But in the traditionalist world, I'm new to this battle. It's been going on for decades. So people are kind of used to some of these things. But you see this happen, and it's what it really is it's the Mass is the battleground. The liturgy wars is where the battle is fought, but it's much bigger than that. And when I was blogging more actively, I did a blog one time where I excerpted something from, I think it was a Dr. Kwasniewski book, and you guys have had Peter on recently. I consider Peter a friend. And it might have been a piece written by an anonymous priest that maybe appeared in Rate Caeli, and then he put it in one of his books. This priest basically talks about how when Benedict was elected Pope, how this progressive element bemoaned that because they knew what was going to happen with the Benedict papacy. And with Summorum Pontificum, they bemoaned that because for them, it's really a theological battle, an ecclesiological battle. It's so much more than just a liturgy. And this is, I think, from the Latin Mass perspective, you try to get other Catholics in the mix to understand this. You say, no, you have to understand this isn't just about the Mass. That's the most important part of the battle because it's a foundational battle, but it's really about representing and repackaging the faith. And there are just certain things that are easier to push through if you can kind of liberalize the liturgy, and from that, the beliefs and teachings of the church. And so it's a real big battle that's being fought. And we just always want to remind people of that. Like, the attack on the liturgy, the attack on the Mass, bad enough as it is in itself, it's so much more that they're trying to change. And it really requires hitting a reset button for like 1965, 1970. It requires rupture. And Benedict said, we're a church of continuity, not rupture. But there are those who are very clearly in desire of a church of rupture. They want it all to have started 1965, 1970. And of course, the first thing that comes to mind is that the new Mass started at 1970. So that's part of their game plan.
Well, exactly. I think that's exactly the most important part of it for me was the fact that Pope Benedict XVI was involved. Well, and JP2 were involved with Vatican II. They saw, they were part of that, new Pentecost that Vatican II was sort of sold to the people as being, and they saw, they believed in perhaps the idea, a recentering towards Christ, a moving away from a sort of more rigidly clerical manualist model. That they got an opportunity then to see how that worked out in the church at large, and they didn't like it. They didn't. They recognised the fact that it didn't work, and so it was then a case of, okay, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's see what we can do to repair it, and that, as you say, had borne great fruit. And was continuing to bear fruit. And then, because we know for a fact that that's exactly why Francis stopped it, as you say, I think the most extraordinary thing, there was a report by Diane Montagno, I don't know if you read it, about the decision that went on to write Traditionis Custodes. And there were two main points that were made by the bishops at the time. One was the Italian bishops couldn't get any vocations because everyone was going to the ICKSP Traditionalist Seminary in Florence. So the rest of the bishops were complaining that they couldn't get any diocesan priests. And the other was the fact that there were all these kids marching across France to go to the traditional Latin Mass,
Yeah.
So what's the answer? Instead, you'd have thought any authenticity, as we've been talking about, would lead you to go, this is where the Spirit is blowing. This is where we can see growth and fruit. But no, the answer to these people, unbelievably to me, was to shut it down. That just doesn't make any theological sense whatsoever.
It It was too successful, and in the free market, if you want to call it that, of parishes and liturgical options, folks were choosing for what the church had always done. But like I said, I think if you view this in the lens of, or through the lenses of rupture, you can't have that. If you want the church to be something different than what she has been historically, then you can't keep doing what she had done historically. And so you have to change it, and nothing spoke to that more visibly than the traditional mass. And as we said earlier, the younger people, the younger, bigger families are being drawn to it, and they're being drawn to it again for the authenticity, and they're being drawn to it because it is otherworldly. Gregorian chant. The smells and bells, the incense, and this is just the visible, things of the senses. But then as they study things more, and they maybe delve into the history of it, they read the prayers, the richness of the prayers, and again, you had Dr. Kwasniewski on recently, but really when you kind of take that layer and peel it back on the various portions of the Mass, and why you do what you do, why you say what you say, all of these things, it just hits you, and you realize it. And so I think that so many in the church, they don't want to have that. And I came from a Protestant background. Now I didn't really grow up with a lot of religion, but I was Protestant, and I went to Lutheran church for several years, and then a few other non-denominational things. And so much of what those who don't like tradition talk about, you just recognize it from a Protestant background. You say that's just. We already kind of fought this battle. That's why Council of Trent came out and condemned what it did, and with anathemas, and talked about these things. We've already kind of done all of this. So if you're a Protestant, you say, no, you don't attack the ministerial priesthood. You don't attack the sacraments. You don't attack the liturgy. I mean, the Council of Trent codified the Mass because it was battling the Protestant revolt, and it identified certain things. So if you take those things out of the Mass and make it less like the Mass of Trent and make it more like something else, theologically the rest is going to follow. And then we would sit there and say, well, why would you do that? You're going to lose vocations, and you're going to lose Catholics, and you're going to lose belief in the real presence, and all of these things. And then you have to stop and say, well, for some of them at least, that has to be why they're doing it. They have to be doing it because they want that loss of belief and that loss of vocations. And for others, because they're stubborn, they want to have it their way, and they don't really care, the results be damned, I guess.
So how does this play out with Bishop Martin then? What side of that fence do you think he's on? Do you think he's genuinely trying to grow the church in Charlotte, and he sees the end of all the things that have been working as the answer? Or do you think he's an ideologue?
Well, I think definitely he's an ideologue, and I say that from people who have sat in meetings with him and who have been exposed to him on a much closer setting. I think he likes to be popular too. I think he likes to be liked. He doesn't want to be disliked. He's not trying to be the villain. However, if you look at there's a series of things. For example, with the Latin Masses, the 4 pastors of the parishes that offer the Latin Masses that would be going away in October of this year, they wrote to, and this is publicly, this has been published, but they wrote to the bishop and asked him to really reconsider things, to request an additional dispensation, to give more time since there's a new pope. Actually, I think they wrote to him initially in April, so it was before Pope Francis had died. I think the email they sent to the bishop was maybe like 4 days before Francis passed away. And then a month later, on May 23rd, the bishop came out with his public reply. He'd already replied to them privately, but came out with his public reply. And they were asking for more time, and they were kind of explaining that with their parishes there was not disunity. They really were kind of giving a personal witness, these 4 pastors, to the bishop about why this was good for the parish, for the faithful, for Charlotte. And his response to them in private, his response publicly with his statement of May 23rd, and his response through a Q&A type document that also that later on got leaked, and we were able to look at, was more or less, I don't care. the basic feeling of it was, I don't care. Oh, I'm taking it from 4 locations to 1 location, somewhat centralized is what it says. Well, it's 45 minutes to an hour from the current Charlotte locations. It's an hour and a half, almost an hour and a half from another location, and it's almost 2 hours and a half from another location. So one location was not going to work. And he says, well, it's, you know what, we're trying to get them to like stop going to that mass. So that's okay if they stop going and they don't want to go make that drive. He talks about vocations. He says in his Q&A to the priest, what if someone says to you about, well, the vocations that have come out of this mass? And he says, well, and I'm paraphrasing again, but this is a public document that people can look up. He says, we don't really want their vocation if they have been formed by the Latin Mass, or if that's what they want to offer as a priest, or if that's their spirituality. And again, I'm paraphrasing that, but that is the tone of that response that he wants them to give. We don't really want that vocation if it's a traditional vocation. So there's a lot of, at one point he has told the pastors of the 4 parishes that, you say to me that we would have to have more than 1 diocesan location for this to be offered if I take it out of the parishes. Well, what's the difference if I give you 1 or 2 or 5? It's never going to be enough for them. So we'll go with 1. It's the most non-synodal, non-pastoral response. And it's always under the banner of, I'm simply carrying out what Bishop Jugas agreed to and what Rome asked us to do. I'm fully implementing Traditionis Custodes. I'm just being the obedient Franciscan. And but of course, we know that people can be very motivated and creative when they want to see something through. And frankly, if you have the pastors who are on the ground in those parishes telling you how good this has been for their priesthood, for their faithful, I mean, I think the pastor's heart is to say, okay, well, let's do something here. And the pastor's heart would be to say, well, we have a new pope, and we don't even know what his thought is on this. So let's take this slow. Let's maybe go back to Rome again and ask some questions, or kind of wait for some further guidance on this that might be coming. I think a lot of people felt like it was more of a, let's rush and get this done before Leo settles in, and just kind of like, it's harder to bring something back than it is to get rid of it. And so it hasn't gone over very well, but that's really that was the strategy there. I'm going to say one more thing, which is about this. We've benefited, I guess, in this current struggle in the fact that this diocesan liturgical norms draft document that had already been given to the Presbyterial Council and some other liturgical working council internally at the diocese back in the beginning part of the year.
This is where it gets a bit complicated, isn't it? So there was the initial clampdown, then there was a Q&A document which was released to pastors, wasn't it? And then that document was leaked. Yes. So obviously, you can see there's sort of dissent in the diocese. And then there was another document, which is the one you're talking about. That was the really bad one. Wasn't it?
That was the real, and that was the one so that one actually doesn't really technically fit into this thing, because the pastor's writing the bishop was in April. His response to them was in April. His public pronouncement was in May. And then his most recent reversal, to go back to the original date, which we can talk about, of giving us a bit more time till October, which was the date given back with the first dispensation, or the original dispensation. That's all one thing. Separate from that was that the diocese has been working on a revision to the liturgical norms for the diocese. I think it was under the banner of, hey, Bishop Jugas did something back in 2011. I want to say that was the year when we had the last liturgical norms for the diocese kind of published for the pastors, or given to the pastors. So it was time. It was time again to do this. Now, the funny part is, to your point much earlier in this talk we're having, you come into a successful company, you might not say, my first year, 8 months into my first year, whatever it is, let's start talking about revising liturgical norms for this diocese that I've just landed in. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that you would tackle it so quickly. But he actually tackled that before any of this current TLM clampdown documents were written or came out. This supposedly was from the earlier part of this calendar year. It just got leaked now because I think somebody realized that the faithful of the diocese needed to understand that this really isn't just the Latin Mass is being attacked. It's the entire reverence of our liturgies in Charlotte are being attacked. And this document, this draft document that really addresses the Novus Ordo more than it does the traditional Mass, because the Mass is going to just get suppressed. The whole idea of the traditional Mass is just suppress it. This is about, hey, the rest of that Novus Ordo that's left over, some of you are kind of hoping maybe you could continue on with the ad orientem, as a few parishes were doing, ad orientem Masses being offered by your pastor, and only a few places were doing that, but communion kneeling at an altar rail. This document is about eliminating all of those things from the Novus Ordo Mass. And
there's even a thing about vesting prayers in it, wasn't there?
it's bad. It's a bad document. It talks about the priest. It tells the priest not to use it. I guess not to give. It's not to say vesting prayers before Mass, which of course you can't even enforce this. It tells the Hispanic community who maintain that like traditional Mass practice of at the elevation of the consecrated host of saying "My Lord and my God" or "Dominus Deus et Deus meus." That it tells them not to say that out loud. Say it in your heart, but not out loud. Just weird things. The most micromanaging kind of things. And so there are some who have seen that document who say it doesn't read like a brand new Franciscan bishop's writing. It just seems a little too, what I've heard is Chicago. It sounds like something that might have come out of Chicago and some of the folks that were with Bernardin and those guys in the past that are still around, aged, but still around. And it could be.
So that's great. Well, I mean, like some of the questions that have been asked to me have been, is this guy just an ideologue, going on his own wacky Franciscan journey to remove reverence, any kind of reverence from Catholic praxis? Or, would he really go out on a limb, having just been in post for a year, without having a red hat behind him? And then the question is, what red hat is behind him?
Yeah, and there's a lot of speculation on that, and I'm here in the ground, and I think a lot of people are. You have to be a little careful because a lot of people are. We continue to pray for Bishop Martin, and we continue to write Bishop Martin and petition him, and being strongly encouraged to write him respectfully and to address him respectfully in this manner. And of course, we do. It just was our local society, St. Pius X Chapel, just had a Mass offered for Bishop Martin in his first year anniversary, and continue to pray for him publicly. And the Chancery's office just formally acknowledged the prayer, thanked him for the Mass, and sent him for the vestibule, his picture, his official picture as a Bishop of Charlotte. So everybody on the traditional side of thing, and everybody in the parishes are praying for him, praying for a change of heart. I think for him to step back and really get to know people. But yes, the document itself and the fact that this is something from months ago, I believe that this leaked draft that applies to all the Masses and what we're talking about, these vesting prayers and altar rails and altar girls, ringing the bells before Mass. Like, no, you don't ring a bell for everybody to stand at the beginning of Mass. It should be somebody at the pulpit or at the ambo, like welcoming everybody and telling them to open their hymnals to page. I mean, it's just weird things to micromanage. So this came out, this was given to the priests internally, I guess, or at least to a Presbyterial council and another working council that he had assembled, and to a person across the spectrum of conservatism, orthodoxy, to even the pastors and priests who maybe aren't the most tradition leaning. They all just said, no, what is this? I mean, it just got shot down. And so it was walked back. But we keep hearing about these liturgical norms, and then it got leaked, and now the whole talking point is, well, it was just a draft. It was just a draft document. But you say it doesn't matter. I mean, it was whether it's a draft document or not. This tells us, in theory, if they had all rubber stamped it, would it not be the norms for the diocese? It's really
so it hadn't. So it wasn't spiked as a result of the pushback because of the restrictions on the Latin Mass. It was already in the. It hadn't been put through because of the reaction from clergy.
Yeah, it had already been from the reaction from the clergy that had seen it, and to others who had been leaked to internally. Other clergy had been leaked to. It had already been shelved, but the dialogue continues of the discussion of the upcoming liturgical norms of the diocese. Now, I have heard a few people who are kind of more conspiratorial minded. Although I think it's just strategic, which is you can come out with a document to priest and say, I'm going to control all of this, or tell you all you can't do the St. Michael prayer after Mass, another one he didn't like. All these things, And then if I only come back with altar rails shouldn't be used, ad orientem shouldn't be offered, I only came out with 5. It's a win for you guys, right? I walked it back from 95 things down to 5, but it isn't a win because those 5 that you imposed on the diocese are things you can't even really impose on a priest if you look at the German and you understand the rights of a priest or a pastor and how they offer the mass. But so I don't know if it's strategic. It's hard to say what's going on. I just appreciate the timing of whoever leaked that document, because it was 4 or 5 months old, as I understand it. It was definitely back when Francis was still Pope, because we already had a level of support, I think, from the non-Latin Mass attending faithful here in Charlotte, because those who are in those parishes who don't even go to the Latin Mass have a lot of friends who do, and vice versa. A lot of homeschooling co-ops and things of that nature. A lot of friends who know each other, who go to the different masses. And then we have just certain, it could be a vigil mass or a Immaculate Conception mass. And these pastors would oftentimes offer a Latin Mass in that place. And all the faithful who just wanted to go to Mass that day would say, I'm going to go to a solemn high Mass tonight. Okay. So it's very healthy within the parishes. And so there was support. But I think the minute this draft document on the liturgical norms that were going to impact the Novus Ordo as well got leaked, then the faithful across the board realized, okay, hold on. This is really an attack on reverence. This is really something that is just not acceptable no matter what Mass you go to. And that's really, I think, why we see all of a sudden there seems to be a real slowdown for the moment, on what's going on. A pause. We've hit a pause button on some of this.
So I suppose the next step in what happened then is that we had this. It was in the Bulletino that Cardinal Roche had been called in to see Pope Leo. And that coincided. So in our time, in European time, that was in the morning. And then sort of, I think it was lunchtime for you guys, but the evening for us. It seemed very much like Cardinal Roche had been told to give Bishop Martin a ring. And Bishop Martin said that he was going to give an extension. And that, part of that statement, which was really interesting to me, was the fact that it actually had in that statement that if something were to happen, if some alteration was made to Traditionis Custodes, the diocese would of course abide by it. Now it's hard to not think that he was told, hang on a minute, we're going to do something with this. So hold fire, isn't it?
You picked up on the same exact part of the statement that I did as well. It absolutely, the timing of it all being in the same 24-hour window, and that verbiage, knowing that Roche had been to see Pope Leo, does very much stand out. It's a saving face type statement. It now allows an out for the bishop and that's how I read that as well. Now maybe that's just wishful thinking, but it does actually, that really does stand out to make a point of implying that it will, of course, if something happens with Traditionis Custodes, then I will faithfully abide by whatever the church is saying here. I hope it's because that's kind of the message people are being given behind the scenes, and we pray that it is. Having said that, I was just at a Mass yesterday, so I guess that would be less than 24 hours after all of this happened, meaning Roche met with Pope Leo and Bishop Martin walked it back and reinstated the original expiration date of October 2nd. I was at a Mass, and we were told that, basically make no mistakes about it. The bishop is very clear that he is in full intention at this moment is to suppress the masses on October 2nd and, shuttle everybody off to the little chapel there that they're working on. And so the bishop is still saying internally that that's absolutely what I intend to do, that there's no change at all on that one. There was going to be a meeting with the faithful that the bishop was calling for on June 24th out at the new location. But because the new location has been now pushed back until October, that meeting has been postponed, which of course, why would you do that? Wouldn't you want to meet with the faithful who are being led through this whole roller coaster of emotions and everything? But we know as well from his emails and his official statements and his Q&A statements that were leaked that he'd given to the pastors, we know that he has said, basically, I don't need to meet with them. I know where they're coming from. I don't need to meet with them. And so, when are we going? And he has not been to visit the communities. So you have these two masses right in Charlotte that are within 25 minutes of the diocese and of the cathedral. And neither one of those communities, he's never come to the Latin Mass at either one of them in the 13 or going on 13 months that he's been here now. So, it's interesting. But I do hope that verbiage that you highlighted there and the timing of it all might indicate that, Rome might have something else they're letting people know about at this time.
Well, and I think lots of people have picked up on the fact that Pope Leo has said some really positive things to the Eastern Rite. He sort of said that we have to bring back some of that mystagogy into our liturgy, that he appears to have said the traditional rite himself. And for me, it's just how violent that is to faithful priests and laity as well, who have really just been trying to be faithful to Summorum Pontificum, and have found, some treasure there. They've found that it affects their community. I mean, this is the Charlotte story to me. They've found that, oh, look, Catholicism works. What always worked actually does work. If we stop trying to, Vatican II harder, then, we find that actually there's some growth and the Holy Spirit is working there. And then to be told, what was it? 2021 Traditionis Custodes came out, and Summorum Pontificum was 2007. So that project has been well underway. And then they've got the attitude that Bishop Martin has approached this with seems to be that what you're doing is wrong. And that's incredibly difficult when you've fallen in love with something, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as I said, there's a very vibrant Catholic homeschooling community in the Charlotte area as well. And you have young people. You have young people who serve this Mass. You have all these young men who serve this Mass, and you have these families. And you are going to rip friendships apart in the sense that a lot of times where they're seeing each other is at Mass on Sunday, and there's other events too. But there's dances or there's activities. But this is such a big. This is their parish. These are their parishes. And so, for example, in our case, we've been going to St. Anne's here in Charlotte since 2008. And we've had the weekly Sunday Mass since 2013. We petitioned Rome and we got a Mass. And actually, March of 2013, we got permission from the then Ecclesia Dei community for our weekly Sunday Mass. It formally, I think, came out the day before Benedict resigned, announced his resignation. Providentially, and that we got that notice before that was announced. And then we got our first Latin Mass. I think it was the Sunday either before or after Francis was installed as the Holy Father. So 2013, March, we've had our weekly Sunday Latin Mass. It's been a high Mass every Sunday, except for maybe like 2 or 3 times, I think. The rest of them have been high Masses, even solemn high Masses on occasion, every Sunday. So in the case of like my children, I have one that we got it when she was 3 years old. My son was 5. My son, who serves it and is a master of ceremony now, an MC at that Mass. This is the Mass I grew up in. This is a story for a lot of other families too. This is a parish that people have given their time and money to. We were there before this parish was, and none of you, if you had a chance to visit St. Anne's when you were here, but it's a beautiful parish, mural, statues, statuary, altar rail, all these things, beautiful architecture. And Father Reed, who's a pastor, has completely built this parish up since his time there. And we've been sitting in those pews all this time, and now we're being told that if you love this Mass, you need to go somewhere else. And for no reason that anybody in the pews or at the ambo, no pastor, no parishioner is saying, yes, take it out of here. It's not good to be here. So it's just an incredibly, to say this is for unity and for concord in the diocese, it is the most disunifying and disruptive. It makes no sense at all. And if you're in the ground for 2 seconds here, you know that. And the bishop's been here now for 12 months. So if you recognize this, really the fight should be up with Rome to say, I don't know what happens somewhere else, but in this diocese, that is not the case. In these parishes, that is not the case. And ask for the dispensation if you need more time. And that's all these pastors, I think, we're asking for from our bishop. So do we have more time right now? We do, because he's gone back to the original expiration date of October 2 of this year. but the effort continues with prayer and fasting and letters, and just to say that
you'd encourage people, Brian, to write to Bishop Martin. If you do, guys, if you do write, please be as polite and generous, and ground it all in grace. But you'd ask for people to write to the bishop, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's various ways to get that address for the bishop. But I mean, if you go to the Diocese of Charlotte, I think it's 1123 Church Street or South Church Street in Charlotte. But you can get the address online. Respectfully write to Bishop Martin on behalf of the people of Charlotte. I know there was a local petition that was started, and I think in the first week, it got 17 or 1800 signatures, and I believe they had said 90% or maybe 95% were from within the diocese. It was a homegrown, and almost double the number of people they claim go to the Latin Mass every week. So either a lot more people are going to Latin Mass, or it was a lot of non-Latin Mass people also signing that petition. And so, please communicate with the bishop. We appreciate that. Definitely keep us in your prayers, that we don't lose this, and that we can continue the momentum that started under Benedict.
Yeah, please God. You've got this wonderful event to look forward to as well. See,
I want to be careful on that one, but I want to be careful on that one. We have a Eucharistic Congress. We're very blessed. Bishop Jugas started the Eucharistic Congress years ago as one of the first initiatives. He said, we need to take the Eucharist out, Christ out to the people, and took the monstrance out to the streets. And we've had this Congress, and every year it's a rather beautiful
you can
picture.
see who's at the center of that particular celebration anyway.
Stylistically, that's a whole different poster than we've ever seen before. We don't normally see our Bishop Jugas was very content to not be in the front of that whole thing. If he was going to have an image out there, when he was in the picture, it was usually carrying a monstrance and was surrounded by seminarians and clergy, and his face you did not see, and the whole different style, I guess, in the current environment. But you know what? You can have different. That is one of those little prudential things. Well, yeah, you know what? If you want to put your face on a poster, that's fine. But when it gets into situations like suppressing the traditional rite and telling priests what they can pray when they're vesting, and telling people they shouldn't use an altar rail, that's a whole different level, and that's what we're addressing, or trying to address right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Please God, we'll pray for you. We hope it works out there. The signs are good from Rome, so we're all sort of waiting to see what Pope Leo does. Let's hope he comes out with a diplomatic but firm solution that allows you to keep the Vitus Ordo there in Charlotte.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate, good friend, and I appreciate you allowing me on the time on your show today.
Great pleasure. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Please do like and share and all that stuff. It really helps us. We really appreciate it. So we'll see you next time very soon on Catholic Unscripted. Thanks for tuning in.